All right, history is absolutely packed with controversial rulers, right? But there's this one emperor whose name has basically become a synonym for scandal, for total decadence, and just chaos. Today, we're diving into the life and legacy of Elagabalus, a guy so notorious it's almost impossible to tell where the truth ends and the legend begins. I mean, listen to that. Ungoverned fury. That incredible quote comes from Edward Gibbon, one of the most famous historians ever. And wow, does it set the stage for a story that is just almost too wild to be true? So it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Out of all the emperors who ever ruled Rome, and there were some real characters, who actually has the absolute worst reputation? Well, if you ask a lot of historians, they'll probably point to one very specific teenager from Syria. So let's talk about Rome's worst emperor. To get why he has this title, we've got to dig into the legacy he left behind. And trust me, it's a legacy that has been shocking people for almost 2,000 years. Okay, so this is the guy right here. His birth name was pretty long, Sextus Varius Avitus Bassianus, but history knows him as Elagabalus. And get this, he only ruled for 4 years. 4. From when he was just 14 until he was 18. But in that tiny window of time, his story became this absolute whirlwind of religious upheaval and reported behavior that was so scandalous, Rome had literally never seen anything like it. So what exactly did they pin on him? I mean, what's the rap sheet? Well, the ancient historians painted this really dark picture. They called him a religious zealot, a sexual deviant who just smashed every Roman norm to pieces, a totally eccentric tyrant, and to top it all off, a completely incompetent ruler. Not a great review, huh? All right, so how on earth does a 14-year-old high priest from Syria suddenly become the most powerful man in the world? Well, his rise to power happened at a time when the Roman Empire was just in total, absolute chaos. Take a look at this timeline. In just over a year, you've got an emperor assassinated, then a new guy, Macrinus, seizing power, and then boom, an army revolt puts a total nobody, this teenager Elagabalus, on the throne. This kind of insane turnover created a massive power vacuum, and someone was ready to fill it. And this is who was really pulling the strings. That army revolt, it wasn't some random thing. Oh no, it was all orchestrated by his incredibly ambitious grandmother, Julia Mesa. She started a rumor, a brilliant one actually, that Elagabalus was the secret, illegitimate son of the beloved, recently murdered Emperor Caracalla. The army totally bought it, and just like that, a teenager was in charge. So he's on the throne. And this is where his reign of controversy really kicks off. At least, that's what the ancient sources tell us. And his actions pretty much immediately started to freak out the Roman establishment. And believe it or not, the controversy, it all started with a rock. A very specific rock. A black, cone-shaped meteorite. See, back in his hometown, Elagabalus was the head priest for the sun god, also named Elagabal. And this stone was their symbol for him. So, what does our new emperor do? He decides to bring his god, in the form of this rock, straight to Rome. You can just imagine the scene. The sacred stone is being paraded through the streets of Rome, and the Romans are just horrified, because he didn't just bring in a new god. He declared that his foreign sun god was now the #1 god in Rome, more important than Jupiter. For the Romans, this was a massive insult, a direct attack on everything they believed. And if that wasn't enough, he then went and married Aquilia Severa. Now here's the problem. She was a Vestal virgin. This was a catastrophic violation of Roman religious law. These priestesses took a 30-year vow of celibacy. The punishment for breaking it? Being buried alive. But Elagabalus just brushed that aside, claiming their marriage would create godlike children. For Romans, this was just beyond the pale. Oh, and the accusations just keep coming. The sources say he gave powerful government jobs to his barber and a chariot driver. They claim he prostituted himself in the palace, wore makeup and wigs, and insisted on being called lady or empress. And then there's maybe the most famous claim of all, from the historian Cassius Dio, that he offered a huge reward to any surgeon who could actually give him a vagina. Yeah, with a reputation like that, you just know his reign was not going to last long. His behavior had managed to tick off literally everyone, the Senate, the people, and this is the big one, the army. His end was coming, and it was going to be swift and brutal. And here's the real twist.
The person who masterminded his downfall was the exact same person who put him in power in the first place, his own grandmother, Julia Mesa. She took a hard look at the situation and realized her grandson was so unpopular, he was putting their whole family's power at risk. She decided he had to go.
So Mesa plays it smart. First, she gets Elagabalus to adopt his much more normal cousin, Alexander, as his heir. Step 2, Alexander totally wins over the soldiers, the Praetorian Guard, while Elagabalus gets super jealous and tries to have his cousin killed. Big mistake. This backfires, like, spectacularly. The Praetorians, his own bodyguards, they riot and turn on him. The historian Cassius Dio gave a pretty graphic account of what happened next. At just 18 years old, the emperor tried to run, but he was caught. He and his mother were killed, their bodies were dragged through the streets of Rome, and then they were just tossed into the Tiber River. A really brutal end for an emperor everyone seemed to hate. But hang on a second. Is that really the whole story? You know, a monstrous tyrant who gets exactly what's coming to him? Well, this is where things get a little more complicated, and our whole understanding of Elagabalus is about to take a really sharp turn. Because, yeah, there's a plot twist. See, the reason for this turn is that pretty much everything we think we know about this emperor comes from just a handful of sources. And once you start looking at who actually wrote this stuff, well, the story gets a whole lot murkier. So let's look at our star witnesses. You've got Cassius Dio, a senator who did great for himself under the next emperor. Then there's the Historia Augusta, which was written like 150 years later and is basically known for just making wild stuff up. These guys weren't journalists. They were political insiders writing what was essentially propaganda for the new guy in charge. So what we're left with are two completely different portraits. On one side, you have the legend, the evil, debauched tyrant. But on the other side, you have a more modern view that asks some tough questions. Was he really a monster? Or was he the victim of a smear campaign? Could he have just been a religious reformer whose foreign ways were twisted and demonized by a Roman elite that couldn't stand him? And that really brings us to the heart of the matter. Were all those crazy stories about him just made up to justify his murder and make the next emperor look good? It's the classic problem, right? When history is written by the winners, how can we ever really know what actually happened? I think this quote from the modern historian Warwick Ball really nails it. He says Elagabalus was, quote, a tragic enigma lost behind centuries of prejudice. Maybe he wasn't a monster after all, but just a person we can't really see clearly because of all the layers of bias piled on top of his story. In the end, the story of Elagabalus is a fantastic reminder that history isn't just a list of facts, it's a story. And stories are told by people with their own motivations and biases. And sometimes the stories they write to tear someone down, well, they end up telling us a lot more about the storytellers than the person they're trying to describe.